The main reason I make these tinkering videos is to show people that doing your own bike maintenance isn't all that difficult. It's just nuts and bolts. Another reason is that I use myself as a guinea pig so that I might find tips, tricks, or warn you about things to watch out for. Pay attention because I fell victim to a simple mistake just like many others before me. There's a lot to go through, so let's get into it. The tools for the job include a 33mm socket and something to turn it. You don't need an impactor, but I have one, so I'll be damned if this isn't a great excuse to use it. You'll need an 8mm and a 5mm hex and something to turn them. You'll need torque wrenches for a range of 63 to 9 Newton meters or 45 to 7 foot-pounds. The workshop manual tells us to use lithium-based moly grease for a few things, and this CV joint grease is just that. And if you're keeping score at home, there are a few adapters for sockets, some screwdrivers that you might need, neither for driving screws, and some zip ties and a rag to take the weight off your brake calipers while the wheel's off. Step 1. Get your front wheel off the ground. Note that you're supposed to always lift the rear wheel before the front, never just the front by itself. You might be changing your rear wheel at the same time, so this is where I insert a shameless plug to watch my rear wheel video. I'm using a Pitbull hybrid headlift stand with a 28 short pin. This thing's pretty slick. The pin inserts directly into a hole on the triple tree and lifts the front end freely without touching the forks. Grab your 8mm hex and spin out the caliper bolts. Collect these in the spacers before wrapping the calipers in a rag so you can zip tie them to front forks without scratching anything. At this point, be careful not to touch the brakes because you might squeeze the pads together and have a tough time getting the calipers back on the rotors. Loosen the nut on the end of the front axle, but don't remove it just yet. Find the 4 pinch bolts on the underside of the forks and back them out a few turns. At this point, you can take the nut all the way off the axle, grab the washer, and slide the axle out. Collect the spacers from each side of the hub and get the front wheel to somebody who has the equipment to put a new tire on your rim. While you're waiting for this to happen, wipe the excess grease and dirt from all the loose pieces and apply a little CV joint grease. Make sure you grease this shaft in the most inconvenient way because you don't want anybody to think you're making a dick joke. Before you put your wheel back on, you'll notice there's a little tiny arrow that should be on the throttle side of the bike. This arrow will point in the direction of a forward rolling wheel. You may also have noticed that the spacers are different sizes and the smaller one is the one that goes on the throttle side. Run the axle all the way through until it's fully seated on the throttle side of the bike. Place the washer and the nut on the end and tighten it to 63 Newton meters or 46 foot-pounds. This is where I used a screwdriver to keep the axle from spinning. Place the calipers and the spacers back on the bike. If they won't fit, you can press the pads back a little bit with a screwdriver, but be careful not to crush the friction material. Screw the calipers back on hand tight and then grab your torque wrench and run them to 45 Newton meters or 33 foot-pounds while squeezing the brake lever. You may need to pump them a few times to get them to bite. At this point, you'll want to drop your front end back to the ground and bounce it a little bit and make sure your front axle is seated properly. Grab your 5mm hex and a small torque wrench and tighten these pinch bolts. The workshop manual I have says to run them up to 19 Newton meters or 14 foot-pounds, but this is apparently the value for the 1299S model. I have the base, which only needs 8 Newton meters or 7 foot-pounds, so let's see what happens when someone attempts to tighten these to twice their capability.
Oh, shit!
I called around to several different places trying to locate one of these bolts, and no one had one in stock. Some parts guy even told me that it'd probably take a month to get one of these because the entire country of Italy shuts down during the month of August. It wasn't until I called the Duck Pond in Winchester, Virginia that someone said, "You know what, we usually have a few of these in our spare parts box, so let me spin one out of a bike on the showroom floor and make sure the threads match." Now, can we all take a moment to appreciate the incredible act of customer service here? Talk about going above and beyond, and for only a $1 screw. The last thing you need to know is that these screws need to be tightened together. Spin them in until they're hand tight, and then tighten each of them a quarter at a time, alternating between the two. Once you hear that torque wrench click, that's it, you did it! As always, thanks for watching. If you made it this far, I assume the video was either helpful or entertaining enough to click that like button. If this happens to be the first video of mine that you've seen, feel free to browse the channel and consider subscribing where the bulk of my content features my Ducati 1299 Panigale. Until next time, double check those torque specs.